providing abortions between 1973 and 2022. And I am trying to keep these, I know this is a difficult subject, I am trying to keep these lectures neutral as much as possible, and I apologize if I fail to do so. Post-Roe clinic boom, 1973 to 1980. The immediate aftermath of Roe versus Wade did not result in abortion becoming a standard part of hospital care. Instead, what happens is they develop freestanding abortion clinics. Most hospitals, because they say that they have religious affiliations or they're afraid of controversy, afraid of problems, they refuse to perform elective abortions. And so by the late 1970s, nearly 80% of abortions are performed in non-hospital settings. This led to the creation of freestanding independent abortion clinics, which moved abortion away from general practice and moved it away from the hospitals into these specialized and often isolated spaces. By moving them to there, it actually makes abortion stick out a lot more. And it's going to make providers highly effective. It's going to make them patient-centered. These places become very good at performing abortions and keeping it a very safe procedure. But it also means that they're going to be very visible for opponents of abortions. There were basically three models of independent clinics. Some of them were created as independent women's health centers, basically created by feminists, and they wanted to have something very different from a traditional doctor's office. They focused on providing patient-centered care. Counseling is an important part of what happens. They don't want the hierarchy of the doctor in charge of the whole clinic. They want instead something that's much more shared responsibility among everybody who works there. Those people are often volunteers. They're often feminist collectives. They provided sliding fees often, and they really saw abortion care as a political act. There are doctors' clinics as well, and those tend to be much more traditional in format, run by a doctor who's definitely in charge, in the center of authority, though they often have to pull on feminists to staff the clinics, and so there can sometimes be some real tension there in these clinics. And then there are places that are, I use the phrase abortion mills. Basically what I'm trying to say is there are some places that are set up that are just there to make money as quickly as possible by performing as many abortions as possible. And early on, there's a real reluctance to regulate abortions, and so some of them are able to get away with highly abusive conditions. Now that over time gets worked out, but in the initial phase, there is this problem. The Hyde Amendment in 1977 is a major transformation, and that's Henry Hyde on the left, and that is Jimmy Carter and Joe Biden, who are there because they voted for the Hyde Amendment back in 1977, though they later claimed to not support it. What it does is it bans the use of federal funds for abortion. And in practical terms, what this means is that they can't use Medicaid. So if you're a poor woman, and many women of color qualified for that, it made it very difficult for you to get access to abortion because you have difficulty affording it. And providers in low-income areas really had to get very good at raising money to try to get the resources they need to be able to perform and provide abortions for all the women who need them. And they're not always able to. War zone era, 1980s to 1990s. As militant opposition gets going, things become tougher, particularly as the new right gains more political traction and the landscape for providers turned increasingly hostile. This is from the 1970s, and it's a clinic that's been burned down. Operation Rescue, as I've talked about before, is a critical part of this, providing blockades to try to prevent people from getting into clinics, providing what they call sidewalk counseling, which is where they talk to patients who are trying to get into the clinics and try to dissuade them from having abortions. And this becomes a situation where often doctors have to be smuggled into their own clinics in the trunks of cars or hidden under blankets in order to be able to get in there. And in a number of cases, it actually leads to the actual destroying of the clinics themselves. Providers are increasingly under siege. Doctors who carry guns, doctors who wear bulletproof vests. A critical part of this is that their privacy is invaded. So people will find out where they live and put up signs saying wanted, giving all of their personal address, phone number, personal information. They have constant harassment, and that harassment doesn't just happen at the clinic, it happens at their homes. They use the fact that they know what they know about people to harass them in additional ways. One tactic that's used in Mississippi, at least, is that you go to the provider's parents' or relatives' churches and tell them that their son or daughter or grandchild is an abortion provider as a way of putting pressure on the provider to stop doing it. And there's lethal violence. A number of people are actually killed. In 1993, Dr. David Gunn in Pensacola, Florida. 1994, Dr. John Britton and his clinic escort, James Barrett. That's the man in the picture. And 1998, Dr. Barnett Slepian, who was killed in his own home. The result of this is that a significant generation of doctors began to retire from providing abortions. It's just not something that they feel able to continue doing for the safety of themselves and their families. In addition to that, medical schools often fail to train doctors in how to practice abortions. But the end result is that the new doctors aren't coming out to replace the doctors who are retiring. And so you have this growing shortage of providers, particularly in the Midwest and the South. Clinics try to fight back. They work together to coordinate defenses and come up with techniques to figure out how to make themselves work. They start using clinic escorts, people who have agreed to come and escort patients past the protesters and get them into the clinic safely and out of it again at the end with a minimum of harassment. And then finally, there is a series of laws and legal practices, and in fact, they end up basically prosecuting Operation Rescue, groups like that, to try to stop them from doing the extremely violent attacks on clinics. And so it sort of dies down to some extent. Though the protesting, the blockading doesn't really entirely go away. And then you have the slow motion repeal when you have the move towards the undue burden test, which basically means that they start harassing them over what is architecturally acceptable, whether or not the doctors have admitting privileges at hospitals, and that's a problem because often local hospitals refuse to allow them privileges. And the result of what this creates is abortion deserts, places where many states are down to a single provider. And this is the single provider in Mississippi until 2022, what they used to call the Pink House. And so there was sort of a bottleneck that made it particularly difficult for rural patients, poor patients, Black patients to get access to abortions. There is a pivot to self-managed abortions because of the ability to use RU 486. The FDA approves of RU 486 in 2000, And it allows medication abortions, which makes it possible for women to have abortions on their own. They don't have to go to the physical clinic, though there are attempts by the states to try to restrict the distribution of it through telehealth. And there are groups that quickly, after the overturning of Roe, begin to make it possible for this to be available through telehealth and the mail. And instead of having this model of having to go to a clinic, having to have an abortion, instead the idea is, based on the Latin American model, that you have somebody who is there to accompany you, to be supportive to you, to provide emotional and physical support, but not necessarily going into the clinic environment. So the end of it, 2016 to 2022, there's an increasing boldness in state legislatures who are hopeful that they can overturn Roe. And so they actually start passing laws that are so broad that they assume that they're going to challenge the Supreme Court to rule on Roe. There was a temporary victory for providers where the court struck down Texas's TRAP laws in Whole Women's Health versus Hellerstedt in 2016, ruling that the medical benefits must justify the burdens placed on access. But then we're down to a few final clinics in some places, like the Pink House, and that final barrier of Roe goes down in 22 with the Dobbs decision. And so you have a sudden transformation of the landscape where a number of states no longer have abortion access at all. Others have it extremely restricted. And you see people having to move from state to state in order to access abortion services in a number of cases. And of course, older institutions like the Jackson Women's Health Organization are shut down.